you kind of found yourself in the post-mill camp after some moving around. What was it that sealed the deal for you that kind of you headed in that direction?
Yeah, so the theology, I think, came after practical stuff. The theology kind of confirmed what I basically came to believe, just kind of looking at the world. I came to some conclusions about, like, I think God's plan is optimistic for the world. I think the church is going to, in a physical way and not a spiritual way, win in the end. God isn't going to, put us in a horrible position and then snap his fingers and Jesus comes in and fixes everything. But I believe the world is actually, and we can talk about this because this is another thing. People think I'm crazy when I say it. I actually think the world is getting better and not worse.
Okay.
and I think most people, at least when I grew up and my family and a lot of people, we generally look around us and we think the world is getting worse. And if we're looking at the past century or so, I would absolutely agree with you. Yeah, the world, at least America, is absolutely getting worse. But I think for me, if we zoom out and kind of look at the whole picture of history, I think history is absolutely getting better, and it will continue on that trajectory until the gospel covers the earth as the water covers the seas, and then Jesus will return and claim his kingdom.
Yeah, so that's the big difference, I suppose. Like you said, that the as Doug Wilson puts it, sorry to bring up, everyone seems to think Doug Wilson is like, I don't know, like David Koresh or something at the minute. I don't know what's going on at the minute, but it's like it's
because he's right about too many things. People hate him because
well,
he's
it's
right.
like there's some suspicion that he's like too influential, and I don't get it. I don't know what the mood is. Kind of, it seems like people are just kind of weird about him at the minute, but I'm sure someone in the comments section would love to correct me and tell me exactly what's wrong with Doug Wilson. But anyway, I heard him say that the Great Commission is sort of, I guess, prophetic, in that it's a set of orders that were expected to be successful. That, when Jesus said to go and make disciples of all nations, that he wasn't saying that in like a forlorn hope kind of way, like this won't actually happen, but give it your best shot. But he meant it like that's the end result, that everyone will come to believe. Is that fair to say, that the idea is that everyone that's left on earth will be believing?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Great Commission, I think God, whenever he lays out a plan, that he actually intends on accomplishing that plan, and he doesn't just give jobs to people that he knows they're not going to accomplish. And the Great Commission is one of those things that he gave to the whole church, and I believe he didn't intend on the church to fail that. Similar to the dominion mandate when he says to Adam and Noah and Abraham, and I think this also applies to the church through the Great Commission, to go be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And so we have this imagery of filling the earth all throughout the Bible. And I don't see that just being cut off because we failed at some point, but that it's actually going to succeed. So yeah. Totally agree.
It's probably. Would you say then that doesn't mean that there won't be sin in the world, but that people will be in submission in the same way that me and you are? Is that the idea?
So I think the new heavens and new earth won't be created and instituted until after Jesus returns, and up until that point, there will still be sin in the world. The world won't be a sinless place, but at the same time, the world will be saved. Just like you and me, after we're saved, we still sin, but we're purified through our faith in Jesus.
Yeah. What makes you believe that that the world will be saved? Other than, I know you mentioned there that the Great Commission obviously kind of gives us some things, and there's that kind of dominion of the earth. But is there anything more specifically that gives you reason to be optimistic rather than to think, okay, this is going to hell in a handbasket?
Yeah, I definitely have more substantial reasons, but I think it deeply resonates with me that God has a good plan for the world. And you always hear that, like, God has a good plan for your life. God has a good plan for the world. You always hear that. But whenever I started thinking about that, when I was younger, was like, God has a good plan for the world, but he really wants to, all the stuff you hear from the dispensational premillennials, like, all that's going to happen? That doesn't actually sound good. And then they say things like, well, it's good once God comes back, or it's good after you die, or whatever. And I'm not expecting the world to be perfect or to the post-millennial kind of ideal kingdom in my lifetime, but at least I can feel like I'm working towards that, and my work isn't just useless because everything's going to get jacked up one day and whatever. So I think there's a coherence in my mind about like the Bible gives us certain responsibilities, and we have to share the gospel, and we have to work, and we have to build things, and we have to live our lives a certain way. And that, to me, intuitively makes more sense with the postmillennial view that actually says that stuff's actually going to stick around, and what you're doing now is going to impact things for potentially hundreds or thousands of years whenever Jesus decides to come back, however long it takes for the gospel to fill the earth. But I've got biblical reasons too, and one that I was going to bring up was the dominion mandate and the Great Commission, which we already talked about, which is, I think, when God gives a command to his people, he intends on them actually accomplishing it, especially when that command is repeated as often as the dominion mandate was. But also the most quoted psalm in the New Testament is Psalm 110, and the first two verses say, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my hand till I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord shall send the rod of your strength of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. And so there's this picture of like Jesus is with God until his enemies are made his footstool. And so I agree with that. There's Matthew 24, which you already mentioned, and maybe you have a different perspective on this. But in Matthew 24, Jesus gives all this prophecy of destruction and all that. But then he says something to me that just like I can't get around. Once I saw this verse, I was like, I can't be a non-millennial anymore. Like this is pure postmillennialism. And Jesus says, after all the destruction and all the prophecies he gives, he says in verse 34, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. And the obvious reading of that is that this generation refers to the generation that he's actually talking to. Now, some people, especially dispensationalists, will take the position that this generation means, the reader, because obviously Jesus is going to come back in my lifetime. He could come back tomorrow. And so this generation must be whatever generation it is when Jesus returns. But to me, that's useless because it's like it means whatever you want it to mean whenever it happens at the time. And that's not how prophecies work. Prophecies are very specific. But also, Jesus is answering a question of these people, and he's not describing something that's going to happen in some far off age, but he's like, this is going to happen soon. And not only is it going to happen soon, but it's going to happen in this generation's lifetime, the generation that he's talking to. And in fact, it does with the destruction of the temple in AD 70.
Sure. And does that, so to a post-millennial, that would be the thing that I guess heralded the beginning of the millennium? Is that is that kind of what that is?
Yeah, so I would say the beginning of Christ's reign it was the ascension. So when Jesus ascended in Acts and he sat at the right hand of the Father, that was him sitting down on his throne. And so Jesus is ruling over the world physically. Like this is his physical kingdom because I'm a physical thing. So some people say like, well, Jesus is in heaven, and so therefore his reign isn't physical. And I'm like, okay, Joe Biden is in Washington. He's not in your living room. And so, but Joe Biden is still the president of you. Sure. Right. Yeah. So just because Jesus isn't physically right next to you doesn't mean that he's not ruling. But also you could look at it another way and say God is omnipresent, is he not? And so he's everywhere physically. So anyway, but yeah.
So 87, or sorry. So you have the ascension of Jesus. I've heard others say as well that the Pentecost is kind of like a consummation of that, sort of like it's almost like there's a period of overlap, I suppose, between the ascension and the destruction of the temple. And some say that that's like an inter era kind of
like between
overlap.
Ages. I believe that was a kind of a transitionary period between ages where the old age passed away at the destruction of the temple, and the church and the church age started, I think, at Pentecost. So I think Jesus became king at the ascension. Jesus was inaugurated, let's say, at the ascension, and the church age began at Pentecost, and the the old covenant age ended at the AD 70 with the destruction of the temple. So yeah, I do believe there was kind of a transitionary period.
And to be specific, then, what is the significance of the destruction of the temple in terms of what was spoken about the beginning of the millennium? Was that mentioned in I guess Revelation or Daniel or any of the other kind of places?
Yeah, so a lot of scholars, interestingly, want to say that I think the majority. A lot of scholars want to say that Revelation was written after AD 70 because it seems to describe things a little too well. But to me, it's like, well, that's what prophecy is. Prophecy is foretelling the future. And so anyway, I believe that Revelation was written prior to AD 70. And so I think a lot of the, I think up until, I forgot exactly what chapter, I think it's 20, up until around Revelation 20, I think applied to the future from when it was written, but the past to us. So I do believe in a final resurrection. I do believe in the resurrection of the dead and Jesus' return and the new heavens and new earth. I believe in all that, but I believe that a lot of the destruction stuff is already fulfilled through the destruction of Jerusalem.